Hello and welcome back to another episode by Peaky Board Gamer. My name is Victor Rakos and today I will teach you how to play a two-player card-driven game designed by Martin Wallace, A Few Acres of Snow. That's another game about the conflicts of the French and the British in America, and it's a game that seems to be complex at start, but for me at least it's not. To prove this to you, follow me to the table and let's see how the game is played. In the game, the British and the French are struggling for a few acres of snow in North America during the 17th and 18th centuries. Each power starts with some initial locations from which they'll try to expand. To do this, players have a variety of actions to perform using cards in their draw decks. Through expanding and drafting, players can add new cards in their draw deck that will increase their options in performing actions. As the game progresses, players will become more aggressive by besieging and using Native American tribes to raid enemy locations. Players can win immediately if they capture specific enemy locations. Otherwise, when the game ends, victory points will declare the winner of A Few Acres of Snow. Place the board in the middle of the table. Place the two siege markers to space 0 of the two siege tracks. Create a supply with the money of the game and the fortification discs next to the board. Golden coins are 5 money and silver coins is 1 money. Cards of the game are split to 3 unequal sets. We have the blue French set, the red British set and the green neutral set. Spread the neutral cards next to the board so that their type and number remaining is visible to both players. Each player now selects one of the two powers and takes the wooden components and the card set of the corresponding power. On the board, colored in blue and red, we see the initial positions of each power. Players place one of their cubes corresponding to a village to each square such space. And they also place a wooden disc corresponding to a town to each circular such space. After players place the initial pieces on the board, they place remaining pieces in front of them. Each player also has a siege location disc that should be placed in front of them as well. The French player starts the game with 5 coins and the British player starts the game with 12 coins. These are taken from the general supply. The card sets of each power is split to 2 main types. We have location cards which depict a map and the name of one of the locations on the board, and the rest of the cards which are called empire cards. Each player separates the 2 types. Then you will find that each type has some cards in deep color and some others in light color. The deep color cards are initial cards and they are placed in the draw deck. The rest, location cards, are placed facing upwards in the available location cards stack. All the initial location cards are cards corresponding to your initial locations on the board. Do the same with empire cards. Find the deep color cards and place the rest facing upwards in the available empire cards. These are also placed in the draw deck. However, there is a rule change. The French bateau card is no longer regarded as an initial card and is placed in the available empire card stack. Take note that the British player starts with no empire cards in the draw deck. Now players flip and shuffle their draw deck. After the draw deck is shuffled, each player draws the top 5 cards to be the starting hand. The game is now ready to start. In the game, players alternate turns, starting always with the British player. On their turn, players first check the siege tracks to see if they have won a siege. Then, players may perform up to 2 actions. There is a big variety of actions. Players may choose to perform the same action twice, and there are also some actions that are free and they don't count as one of the 2 actions. While performing these actions, players will have to spend cards which will move to their discard pile. After a player finishes with the 2 actions, they need to draw cards from the draw deck to bring their hand back to 5 cards. Whenever a player cannot draw another card from the draw deck because it's depleted, they need to reshuffle the discard pile and then continue drawing the rest of the cards. Important! When players finish their turn with more than 5 cards, they don't discard down to 5, they keep all the cards. And then it's the next player's turn, and so on and so forth. The French win the game immediately after they win a siege in either New York or Boston. On the contrary, the British win immediately after they win a siege in Quebec. If this doesn't happen, then we have a couple of other endgame triggers that I will explain towards the end of this video, and after that we move to victory point counting. Actions, actions, actions. There seem to be too many of them. However, most of the actions can only be performed if you have the appropriate card. So you won't have that many options all the time. Also, many of the cards write on them what the action is about and how to perform it. So you should be fine. Let's start with expansive actions first. With the settler location action, players may expand from their initial positions into a neutral area. To do this, players first play any location card and then they can settle on any neutral location listed on this card. Next, the player must play a second card that has the symbol depicted on the left of this list. In this case, a bateau. The bateau must be depicted in the bottom list of icons of the card. Some locations depict the settler icon you see here. If the location we settle has this icon, then the player must play a third card that has the settler icon in the bottom. In our example, we will settle Fort Frontenac, so that's not the case. Now, all the played cards move to the discard pile, the player adds a cube in the new settled location, and finally the player searches the available location cards for the corresponding settled location card and places it in the discard pile. With the develop a location action, players may advance one of their villages into a town. To do this, the player plays a location card that has a village cube, and if that location has the settler symbol, they also need to play a separate card depicting the settler symbol. Then the player replaces the cube with one town disc. If you take a closer look to most of the locations, you will find this hexagonal symbol depicted. These are victory points for the end of the game. Players will gain these victory points at the end of the game if they have a village cube in the location, but having a town disc doubles these victory points. Finally, we have the fortification action. As it's written on the card, the player first pays 3 money and then another location card to add the fortification disc into that location. In this case, the player adds a fortification disc in Trois-Rivières. Take note that all locations can have up to 1 fortification disc. Last but not least, fortified locations are immune to raids. We'll see raids later on. Let's move now to card management actions. We saw earlier that players may gain new location cards through conquering. With the Draft 1 Empire card action, a player gains 1 new Empire card either from this stack or an available neutral one. If there is a cost depicted in the top of the card, this cost has to be paid to the general supply. Some cards, however, don't have a cost at all. After paying the cost, if applicable, the card is placed on the discard pile. If players need to get rid of useless cards in their hand, they have the discard cards action. With this action, the player can discard 1 or more cards from their hand into their discard pile, but they need to pay 1 coin for each card discarded after the first. So I would have to spend 1 coin for the action I just took. As you can see, players have here a reserve area. Players may use this reserve to add cards and then retrieve them later when they need them. With a place a card in your reserve action, the player can place only 1 card into the reserve, and as the rule has changed, you can never place location cards in here. Cards in the reserve have to be placed facing upwards, and there is a limit of 5 cards. To retrieve cards from the reserve, we have the Retrieve Your Reserve action. This action is free and does not count as one of your 2 actions. Players may retrieve any number of reserved cards into their hand, but the cost is 1 coin for each card retrieved. So if I paid 3 coins, I could retrieve all these cards into my hand. Next we have the Governor action, which is described on the card itself. With this action, you may place 1 or 2 cards from your hand back into the available stock. So I could place 1 card here and 1 card here, thus thinning my deck down. Next we have the Intendant action, again described on the card, and that's an action that only the French player may perform. With this action, the player spends 2 money and then searches the discard pile for any 1 card and adds it to their hand. Finally, we have Home Support, which again is a free action. As it's written, the player takes the top 3 cards from their deck and adds it to their hand. Let's explain the financial actions of the game now. Take money. You simply play a card with a coin value and you gain that amount of money from the general supply. The merchant action. You play any card that depicts a ship in the bottom, and then you can play up to 2 other cards depicting coin symbols and get these coins from the general supply. In this case, I would gain 2 coins. The trader. As it's written on the card, you play additional cards that depict the first symbol and you get 2 coins for each one of these cards. Finally, we have the action piracy, which can be taken only by the French player, as it is only displayed in the French Louisbourg location card. By playing piracy and then any other card that depicts the ship symbol, the French player steals 2 money from the British player. If the British player doesn't have the money to pay, the French player takes the difference from the general supply. In this game, peace is not gonna last for long, so let's move to aggressive actions. The most important is besiege a location with which the player is trying to capture an enemy location. In this example, the French player is trying to capture Albany. Similarly to the settle action, the player must first play a location card that lists the target location and then play a separate card that has the means of transportation needed. At this point, you ignore the settler icon that the location might have. However, the player must play a third card that has 1 or more military symbols depicted. The 2 first cards are placed into the discard pile, the military card into the French siege area, and the player finally places the siege location marker next to Albany to indicate that there is an undergoing siege there. Each player can initiate only 1 siege, and this is why we have 2 separate tracks and 2 separate siege areas. After a player's initiated siege comes to an end, they can go on and start a new one. In these areas, players place all the cards that will support the corresponding siege. As a last step, we need to set the siege marker. As a default, the marker is first placed to 1, favoring the opponent, and the number is also underlined to remind you of this. Next, if the besieged location is fortified, the marker is moved 2 spaces further. Finally, some of the locations have these military symbols next to them. For each one of these symbols in the besieged location, the marker will move 1 space further as well. However, that's not the case here. Finally, the marker is now moved 1 space for each military symbol played on the card, favoring the besieging player now. The siege is now set. The French player has spent 1 action to initiate a siege in Albany. However, the siege marker is in the British area. If this doesn't change, then at the start of the British player turn, the British will check if they win any siege, and they will be winning this one, so the French will lose the siege from the start. To avoid this from happening, the French player must do something during the same turn that brings the marker at least to the grey area, if not the blue. This brings us to the next action, which is reinforce a siege. With this action, the player can play 1 card that depicts military symbols to the corresponding siege area in order to move the siege track towards their favor. Some locations depict a ship icon next to them. If the besieged location has such an icon, then ship icons qualify as military symbols and can be used to reinforce the siege. The French player still has 1 more action. They will spend 2 coins to take the reserve cards, and this is a free action. Next, the player plays the military leader, which again is a free action and adds 1 more military symbol. The French player still has 1 action left, and they will spend it to use the siege artillery, which costs another 3 coins to play. This card has 3 more military symbols, which will bring the siege marker to the blue area. Now it's the British player turn, who first checks if they win any siege. They're actually losing a siege, and now it's their turn to try and bring this at least to the grey area to avoid losing the siege at the start of the French player's next turn. Let's say that British do not support the siege during their turn. So the French on their turn check and see that they have won the siege in Albany. The attacker captures the enemy village or town piece and brings it next to their play area. If there is a fortification disc, it is placed back to the supply. Next, the player places 1 of their village cubes into the location place. However, if the location depicts a settler symbol, the player must also spend a card with the settler symbol, otherwise the location will be left empty. The French player plays a settler icon and settlers the location as well. Now the French player searches the available location cards to find Albany, which is placed in the discard pile. If the defender wins the siege, they get to keep their controlled location. All cards in the siege area are then moved to the discard pile. However, the loser of the siege, now the British, must also lose one of the cards they played in the corresponding siege area. This card can only be an Empire card and it returns to the corresponding stack, either personal or neutral. The British player did not support the siege attack at all, so if there is no applicable card, the player does not lose any card. Take note that the British Albany card is not returned to the available location card. It is kept in the player's draw deck as a completely useless card. Finishing with the siege action, I now have to explain the concept of supply. All controlled locations must always trace supply to Boston if you are the British or to Quebec if you are the French. Supply is traced through a chain of controlled locations either by road, river, or locations that depict the ship icon. All locations that have the ship icon are always in supply with Boston, or with Quebec if they are controlled by the French. Also, locations that are around lakes are always connected in terms of supply. Black dotted lines are Indian trails, and locations may not trace supply through these lines. Important: Fort Beauséjour and Trois-Rivières have ship icons even if you don't see one when it comes to supply, but when a siege takes place in these locations, you may not place ships as military icons, and this is why they don't depict a ship. There should be a ship in brackets or something like that. Enough with theory. After the British lost Albany, these two locations have lost supply to New York, which is always linked to Boston via ships. So what happens to locations that are out of supply? The location cards that should exist in the player's draw deck are useless. They cannot be used in any way. They can only be discarded through the discard action or removed using the governor action. This will stop only if these locations are again in supply to Boston. Coming back to the reinforced siege action, locations that are out of supply cannot be reinforced during a siege. This means that if these locations are besieged by the French, the British player will not be able to support them. They are vulnerable. The second way to attack the opponent is by raiding. To initiate a raid, you need a card that allows it. For example, the Native Americans, you pay 1 money and you can initiate a raid or an ambush. We'll see the ambush later on. After you use the card, you can raid an enemy location which is directly adjacent to a friendly location. The two locations must be connected either by road, by river, by lake, or even by an Indian trail. So for example, I could select Kennebec and raid Fort Halifax, or select Fort St. John and raid Ticonderoga. The thing is that you can also play multiple such cards in order to increase the range of the raid for an additional city for each raid card you use. So now if I selected Kennebec, I could raid Pemaquid or Deerfield. Important: fortified locations may not be raided and you cannot trace raid past them. So I could not select Fort Stanwix and raid New York. After the target of the raid is set, the defender may cancel it by playing any one card that allows the blocking of raids. The defender may also cancel the attack by playing the card of the corresponding raided location. The defender must have this one card in their hand, so it's fairly easy to block a raid. However, if it's not blocked, the piece is taken by the attacker and is kept near their play area. If it was a cube, then the location remains empty. If it's a town, then it is replaced by a village using a cube from the defender's available stock. Let's move to the action Ambush. There are certain cards that allow players to initiate an ambush. Let's say that the British player initiates an ambush by playing the Rangers. The defender may now cancel the ambush by playing any card that allows the blocking of an ambush. If a player cannot defend against an ambush, they must lose one card that depicts this symbol, either from their reserve or their hand. If they don't have such a symbol, they must show their hand to their opponent to prove this. However, this is not the case now, and the player must lose this card. The card must move back to the available Empire card stack. The last aggressive action is the one that can be initiated by an Indian leader or a priest. There is no defense against this attack. If the attack finds you with a Native American's card either in your reserve or in your hand, you must submit any one of these cards to the opponent, who will then place the card into their discard pile. Again, if you have no Native American's card, you must prove it by showing your hand to the opponent. As a free action, you can also withdraw from an undergoing siege. You treat that as if you lost the siege. You lose one of the played cards and you return the rest in the discard pile. A reason to do this is to initiate a new siege in another location during this turn. Finally, players may also take the pass action in order to perform less than 2 actions. If no player achieves immediate win by winning a siege in the opponent's home provinces, the game can also end with one of the 2 following game end triggers. The game ends if at the beginning of a player's turn there is no undergoing siege and the facing player has either all of their cubes or all of their town discs on the board. Trigger 2 is that the game ends if at the beginning of a player's turn, again if there is no undergoing siege, a player has managed to capture enemy pieces equal to 12 points. Each captured town worth 4 points and each captured village worth 2. So at the moment both players have 10 points of captured pieces. In our example, the French player is on the verge of triggering the end of the game. If the French advance one of their villages into a town, then during their next turn, if there is still no undergoing siege, the game will end as they have placed all of their towns. In another example, at the start of the French player's turn, there is an undergoing siege that the French player wins and neutralizes Kennebec by capturing the opponent cube. If this situation remains, then at the French player's next turn, if there is still no undergoing siege, the game will end because the French player has captured enemy pieces that worth 12 points. When the game ends by one of these 2 conditions, the game proceeds to victory point counting. Each player scores victory points depicted in their captured locations, and remember that towns score double. Then players add to their score victory points for enemy pieces that they have captured. Again, it's 4 victory points per town and 2 victory points per village. The player with the most victory points is declared the winner. If there is a tie, then the French always win. And that was the rules explanatory video of A Few Acres of Snow designed by Martin Wallace. If you like our videos and want to see more, please subscribe to my channel, and until next time, have fun and play more board games.